So our first lesson here of our actual geometry chapter 1, and we're just going to take it slow. We're going to start the chapter and the year by doing some vocabulary, okay? So we're going to look at some different symbols and things and make sure you know what the names of them are and how to label them and all of that. And then we are going to do something new, and we're going to talk about these things called unions and intersections. It'll seem a little crazy, but it's really going to help you wrap your brain around how to look at pictures this year, because you're going to be doing a lot of looking at pictures, but really looking at them in a different way, seeing new possibilities that you haven't really been looking for when you've seen mathematical pictures before. So that's the idea of our first lesson here, 1.1. So just as a little warm-up, what are just 3 different ways to name this angle? I've given you a hint that there's one way to do it with only 1 letter, and there's 2 ways to do it with 3 letters, and I even show you all the letters over here. So I'm just wondering how much you know from before about naming angles. All right, so hopefully you know about naming angles with 3 letters, right? And the most important letter that's going on in this angle is this one. This point where it turns. This point where that angle shifts direction is called the vertex, right? And that is going to be a really important thing that we're going to talk about a lot this year, is that vertex. So since B is the vertex, then when I name this using the 3 letters, the B has to be in the middle. So that middle letter is always my vertex letter. So that B has to go here. So if I use 3 letters, I could start up here at the A and name it A, B, C, right? That could work. Or I could start down here at the C and go backwards, and I could name this angle CBA. Those are both ways of naming this same angle. It absolutely works. Now, since this angle is a special angle where there's only one possibility coming out, the only angle coming out of vertex B is this angle, I could label this as just angle B. But be very careful on this, okay? Not every angle can be labeled with only 1 letter. For example, if I had this, okay? If this is B, right, maybe this is A and C, but now I have another possibility. I cannot say angle B anymore, because the question is which one, right? Is it this angle, is it this angle, or is it this angle? I don't know. So in this case, you cannot label it as angle B. So be careful labeling with 1 answer, or 1 letter, excuse me. I highly recommend that you just play it safe and always use 3 letters to label your angles. And remember that vertex letter has to be the one in the center. But I know you've talked about angles before. It might have been a long time, but hopefully this is coming back to you a little bit. Ooh, sorry about the bell. All right, now a little more vocabulary. Let's see, can you draw these? All right, now when it says label, it means like put the letters in your picture. Okay, so see if you can pause your video and draw these. How many of them can you get without me? All right, well, hopefully the first one you could do. Point A, a point that looks like this, right? And then I would put an A underneath it to label it, or somewhere by it. So hopefully that one was pretty easy, point A. Line AB, line AB. Now this one is tricky, right? If I just have points here, here's A, here's B, this is not a line. What's special about a line is that it goes on forever in both directions. Goes on forever in both directions. Okay, so if you have a line, it has to have the arrows on the ends. If there are no arrows, it's not a line. So if you drew this, you would have to have that line with the arrows on both ends, and then the points A and B on there somewhere, okay? Now, technically, a line is made up of just a million points, right? An infinite number of points. Point, as far as you could go. And you could label every one of them if you wanted to, and then you could name it in 1,000 different ways. But since the important letters that they told us were A and B, those are the 2 points that we have to have on there, okay? And each point is named with a single letter. I should have listed that up here, right? Any point is named with a single letter only. Okay, so there is no such thing as point AB. It's point A and point B. So if there's two letters, that's two different points. But technically, you know, that line has an infinite number of points in it, but those are the two important ones that we want to make sure are in there when we call it line AB. All right, now the next one is line segment AB. Line segment, or sometimes we just call it a segment, BC. This means that there are endpoints, right? So that the endpoints are B and C. So a segment has endpoints, and if I'm calling it segment BC, it has to have endpoints of B and C. So it has to have those letters on the ends. That's the big idea with a segment. So a segment has to have the end point. So it does not go on forever. It's done. Okay. Now a ray, kind of similar, right? This ray is one that maybe you didn't know, all right? But a ray has one end point and goes on forever in the other direction. So a ray has one end point. And goes on forever in the other direction. All right, so it's kind of like a combo of a line and a segment, right? So it has one endpoint and goes on forever in the other direction. Now the tricky part is you have to read this how they say. So if it's ray DE, the first letter is the end point. So the first letter has to be D. That's the end point. Goes on forever then in the direction of E. Goes on forever past this point. Okay? So it has to go that way. When it says ray DE, D is the end point. E is the direction that it goes on forever. So it goes on past E, but D has the end point. So that's a tricky one. Lots of details going into that. Now this might seem like, oh, this doesn't, who cares? But it will matter, and it will make a difference that you are very specific with your little details like that. All right, so now we have angle XYZ. Now we just talked about in our last problem, our warm-up, right, that this middle letter is the important one. That middle letter is the vertex, right? So we got to make sure, let me get a different color here. This is our vertex letter. So Y has to be here on the corner, right? And then it's going to go two different directions from there, right? So that Y has to be the vertex, so it's got to be here. But then it doesn't matter either way. However you wanted to do that, you could put X up here and Z down here, or you could put Z on top and X on the bottom. That doesn't matter. But Y has to be the vertex, right? All right, and then finally we have a triangle STR. So you have a triangle that looks like this. Here are my vertices, all my points, and those you can put in any order that you want. S on the top, T on the left, R on the right, or R on the top, S, T. It doesn't matter. The order does not matter. When you're talking about a triangle, right? Since they're all vertices, you just pick wherever you want to put them. All right, hopefully you were able to label those up. I do recommend that you go back and put those little notes in next to them. If you could draw them all, great, that's awesome. You're off to a great start. But label, put in those little notes that I put in so it'll help you remember later on. Okay, now as we were drawing those, we kind of talked about some symbols, so we can use some short ways, like in the second one, really, it says line AB. Well, if we had to write the word line every time we wanted to talk about one this year, we would have pages and pages full of notes. Same line segment BC, like that's just too much to write, so we have some symbols, okay? So notice the first one is just a line above the AB, but without any arrows. And the second one has BC, it's got a line above it, but it has arrows on the end. So which one of those do you think is an actual line, and which one do you think is a segment? The one with the arrows, right, has to be the line, so you got to be really careful. So this one is actually line BC. All right, so it has to have the arrows if it's a line. Since the first one doesn't actually have arrows on it, this is a line segment, right? So a lot of times we just call this segment AB, but you could say line segment if you wanted to. But most of the time we're just going to hit that, just say segment, save some time, right? But we really want to use the actual symbols instead of writing out all of the words, okay? All right, now this next one has a line with one arrow and not both arrows. Oops, sorry, I thought I had my highlighter. Okay, so this one was no arrows, that was a segment. The one over on the right had both arrows, that was a line. So this one has to be a ray. So this is ray. And remember that first letter is the end point. So this is like the end point here. So the first letter has to be C. And then the way that it's going on forever, right? This goes on forever in this direction. So this has to be A. So it has to be ray CA in that order. All right, and then hopefully this last one, that's hopefully is a symbol that you've seen before. That's the symbol for angle. So this is angle CTA, right? All right. So the next question down at the bottom says, are these reversible? Meaning, do I have to say segment AB, or could I say segment BA? Yeah, I could say segment BA. This would be the same thing, right? That's okay. Could I call it line CB? Yeah, that would be the same thing, right? If I draw it, here's B and here's C, and I could name it backwards, same thing. Here's my segment, A and B. I could call it BA, that's the same thing. If I name my angle, could this angle be ATC? Sure, just remember that middle letter has to be your vertex, right? But I could label it in the other direction because I could have my angle, oops, here. As long as T is here, it could be CTA or ATC. It could go backwards, that's fine too. Ooh, but what about the ray? The ray is very specific, right? Ray has to have an end point of C, and it has to go on forever in the direction of A, right? That's the way it has to go. So if I had ray AC, or labeling that AC like this, that means the end point is A, and it goes on forever in the direction of C. Those are not the same thing, right? Because one is stopping by C and going on forever past A, and the other is stopping at A and going on forever past C. So almost all of them work. Yes to the segment, yes to the line, yes to the angle, no to the ray. So all are reversible, but the ray, that one is not. All right. So we got through our vocabulary. Now we're going to talk about something new. So these two new words are union and intersection. So union and intersection. What does union mean? What does intersection mean? So just kind of thinking in general, using your language artsy skills. Union would mean to join together, right? Join together. Or you could say, you know, like, what do they have combined? That's the big idea. Unions will mean, what do they have combined? Intersection is like where they cross, right? So intersection really means where do they overlap? Okay, and so now we have these symbols, right? So this U means if you combine the things together, what do you get? So that's for union. U for union. What do you get if you combine them? And then I have this upside down U. That means the intersection. So where do these two things overlap, right? So that upside down U means the intersection. I just want to know, if I just look at these two things, what do they have when where do they overlap? What would that be? So it'll make a little bit more sense here if we start, seeing what we're going to look at. So here's a picture, a mathematical picture. You're going to see 1,000 of these this year. And there's a lot going on. I see a lot of different vertices in there. I see different points. I see, lines and segments and all of that. So this is where this is going to come into play. So can you start picturing this? So in my first one, this says, where does segment AB overlap with segment BC, right? So this is intersection. So this means, where does it overlap? Now, I find when I'm looking at this, especially at the beginning while you're still getting the hang of it, I like to use color. So I'll take this first one and I'll say, okay, segment AB is going to be in yellow. Now, if it's a segment, it has endpoints. So it's going to end point here at A, end point at B, and it's going to be the segment in between them, right? And then I'm going to take segment BC and I'm going to put it in blue. Segment BC has an end point at B and an end point at C, and it's going to be the line in between them, right? So I'm looking for, where do they overlap? What do they have in common? What's double colored? Well, that would be the point B. That's the only thing that's double colored, right? So the intersection of segment AB and segment BC is the point B. Now, you probably didn't even think to look at that picture for that, but you're going to have to start looking for those types of things as we get farther on in the year, and it'll make more sense in a couple of lessons. But this is training your brain before we make you do the work. Okay, so the next one is, again, the intersection, right? Where does segment DB overlap with segment AC? See if you can do this one. Right, let me get some colors here. So I'm going to pick, oh, that's too dark. Okay, let's do a little bit lighter. Okay, segment DB, end point at D, end point at B, segment in between. All right, and I've got segment AC, end point at A, end point at C, segment in between. Now this one's a little bit trickier. Where do they overlap? They overlap right here, right? This is a point, and it's point E. Okay, hopefully you're starting to get the hang of it. Now, intersections are not always points. We'll see those in the next ones coming up, but I started it easy for you so you could just get the hang of it. But it's not always going to be a point. It could be a segment. It could be a ray. It could be a line. Those could all be intersections. It's okay, all right? But before we move on to more complicated things, let's look at this one. Now, this one is the union. This is the union, or what do they have combined, right? So if I combine ray CD with ray CB, what do I get? Now I'm going to just get rid of all my color here because, it'll get really complicated, right? But when I'm combining them then, let's see, ray CD, endpoint at C, going on forever past D. Now, I know the picture doesn't show that, but you can always extend. Any segment can always be extended in any direction into a line. Any segment can always be extended into a line, okay? No matter what, or a ray, or whatever you want. Even though in the picture it stops, we know that it could keep going on, and we could just always draw that past if we want to. All right, so there's ray CD, and then I have ray CB, so end point at C, going on forever in the direction of B, so past B. Now, if it was intersection, I'd be looking for where do they overlap. But here, this is union. So if I combine those, you see them both in the same color. That's why I used the same color on this one, right? Because I want to combine them. What did I make? I made an angle. And the vertex of that angle is C. So this is angle DCB. Or you could say angle BCD, right? Either way, as long as I have C in the middle. Now, could I just name it angle C? No, because it could be this angle or the big one that I wanted, right? So I cannot say just angle C here. And that's why I wanted you to be careful. So let's use 3 letters, right? Always use 3 letters. Okay. Now the next one is also a union. So again, I'm going to do the union. See if you guys can figure this one out. Okay, getting a color here. Let's go with this one. So I want ray ED, so end point at E, whoops, end point at E, going on forever in the direction of D, and then ray EC, end point at E, going on forever in the direction of C, and again I have an angle, right? This time the vertex is E, so I have angle DEC, or I could say angle CED, but no angle E, because I have a whole bunch of angle E's. So I just got to make sure that E is in the middle, but you got to use 3 letters.